You're listening to the Faith and Other Oddities podcast, brought to you by the Raven Creek Social Club, where we talk about faith and other oddities. For questions, comments, or to be part of the conversation, join us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, where you can find us at Raven Creek SC. Now for your hosts, Emily Dixon and Nathan Underwood.
Hey everyone, welcome back to Faith and Other Oddities, the show where Emily and I read the Bible and talk about it. As many of you probably noticed, there was no show last week. That is because the school I work at had a 3-day weekend, so we went to go visit and see everyone, trying to get as much time in there with Mom as we can. So
We had a full
yeah,
house.
that's yeah, that was fun. Got to travel a bit. But yeah, this
I'm looking
week,
forward to summertime visits again. I'm already why is everybody stuck inside the house? We need people dispersed through the yard.
yeah. Yeah, and especially with my two kids, because they're good kids, but they are very active.
And I haven't had littles in the house except for your two kids, my grandkids, and that just happens periodically. So I'm not used to staying up with that level of chaos and energy.
Yeah,
And like you said, they're good kids. I don't have any problems with them. I don't even think I had to get onto them maybe once a slight correction when they stayed with me for a week. So,
right,
you know,
right.
at those ages, if that's all you're having to do, they're good kids. So,
Yeah, they do pretty good. So,
but
but yeah, and I'm not gonna be terribly promising about what I am gonna deliver today because I had a long work day yesterday. It was good. I love my job, but man, it was a nonstop day, and so I'm a little worn out.
well, and honestly, it's just going to be kind of crazy because what happens is number one, I've got a couple of things going on. This section, the stuff I was curious about, there wasn't a lot of resources. There wasn't a lot of stuff written about it. So I wound up researching all these random kind of tangential topics that I kept running into stuff that was interesting and I wanted to include and has some impact on our passage here in First Kings, but maybe not as directly as I would have liked. And then on top of that, my research time was kind of cut up in these little short segments. So y'all are just going to have to hang on for the ride because I kind of went everywhere. And the
Okay.
more choppy my study time gets, the crazier it gets. But anyhow, we are still in First Kings. We're in chapter 7. We are talking about the pillars that were put in the temple. And we started last week kind of talking about just the construction and how they were put together because it's fascinating to me because I have done some bronze casting. I've done silversmithing, and to think of a project this size, it blows my mind. And
Hmm.
I don't think we realize how big it is. And I really wanted to find a way to make that relatable. And so we talked, I think, last week about whether or not it was bronze or copper or brass and all of that, and why it was important that it is bronze because how you can work with bronze has got a little different properties than the other metals. But the exact look and feel of the pillars and what they looked like were kind of a matter of debate. There's a lot of little details that were kind of hard to set in context and it's really hard to envision. And this is actually one of the reasons why I disagree with Edward Vaith when he talks about the tabernacle and how there was no room for artistic interpretation, direct instructions were given. And even though he's talking about the tabernacle there, as an artist, you can very quickly see the holes. You can see that there is not yes, you can talk about, okay, well, it needs to be ridged. Well, what size ridging? How should the edges be finished out? How far apart should they be? How deep should the ridges be? All of these things are still up for interpretation. Something's going to be the color blue. What color blue? Sky blue, blueberry blue, robin's eggs blue, what color blue?
Hmm.
Those are things that you don't you can't really describe in words. They have to be something that's shown. So when I was researching these pillars, I found several different depictions of them that artists have tried to recreate. All of them were different right there. That alone tells you that trying to decide exactly what they look like is not really something we can definitively put forth to anyone. We have to accept the fact that everything is conjecture. And that's okay. And I don't think there's a huge problem with that because the important parts are kept in the passages and they are kept in the words. And so we can be at ease with the fact that we do know they're pillars. We know that they're good size. Matter of fact, they're about 30 foot tall and they're about 8 foot tall in circumference. So these are pretty good size pillars. They are not tiny. Um, they had decorative cups at the top or caps at the top. We really aren't for sure what those caps look like. This is where most people begin to kind of take off in different routes in what they think these caps looked like. We've got
Hmm.
elements that are described in the passages, but they really aren't. They aren't laid out in such a way that you can definitely say what they looked like. What they do tell us is these pillars are not for support. These caps would preclude any kind of, beam being rested on top of them because at the top we had a lily. They're decorative in nature, and this was very common to have these kinds of pillars in, ancient temples. I read one account where people said that, frequently in Phoenician, temples, there was one wood pillar and one metal pillar, the wood pillar being an Asherah pole and the metal pillar being for Baal. I'm not sure. We'd have to do more research. I kind of was iffy on that point, but I did find other accounts of pillars in ancient temples. Now, we do know
Right.
that, yeah. So, you always want to be careful with your sources and trying to get back to primary sources. There's a lot of just weirdness out there. We'll talk about some things that definitely are not present that some of the conspiracy theorists like to try to impose on the text. Now, we do know that they were hollow, so these are not solid, which, I mean, good grief, trying to move something solid of that size made of bronze would I don't even know how they would do it. I'm sure they would have figured out a way. We have great buildings from that time and before that required moving great weights, but, Jeremiah makes note that the walls of the pillars were 4 fingers thick. So, I'm gonna assume that that was not my fingers, so approximately, what, 4 inches thick and of bronze?
Roundabout, yeah.
Yeah, and couldn't go by my hands, mine's more like 3.5, but, the idea that these were actually poured in, or cast in rings, so you would have segments, one ring would be poured, and then it would be moved to the temple, and they would be stacked, is probably what happened
Hmm.
with these. That, seems to be a common methodology of making these kind of pillars, but it also allows for the transportation from where they were created. And actually, as we get further into the chapter, we're going to talk about where they were poured, why that location may have been chosen. And so they were placed outside the sanctuary, but inside the hall. And probably the most puzzling thing about these pillars is the names that are on them, Jachin and Boaz. Uh, there's a plethora of theories out there about what this is. And
Yeah, this is what I'm interested in trying to figure out, like the symbolism and the you know roots of these names and why there's a bronze sea, the different things like that. That's the stuff that I'm curious about.
yeah, it's that's a really good question because you could go down so many rabbit trails and rabbit holes and through the looking glass and I mean you end up in alternate realities when you try to research this if you aren't careful. So many theories. One was that they were named after the craftsman who made them. Well, we know that Hiram Abi was the craftsman who was over it. So, these would have had to have been apprentices. And if you're going to put our names on it, why in the world would we put an apprentice or even a master craftsman who was hired by the main craftsman? Why isn't Hiram's name somewhere in the temple? So I kinda don't go with that one. Um,
I
there's
don't know. I
some
mean, that
debate.
one, to me, that one doesn't seem that far fetched. There, I mean, like say he's already listed as like the overseer of the whole project, and this might be. I mean, they may not even be necessarily apprentices. They may be other master craftsmen that he brought in as contract work. I mean,
And
I
that's a
know that that's
possibility.
kind of putting kind of a I know it's putting kind of a modern saying contract work, but I know that like sometimes you'll bring in if you're if it's a big project, you might as well
And it
bring in some
was.
other people who aren't going to screw it up.
Right.
So
And so,
that
yeah.
one doesn't seem too far fetched to me. But what else you got?
But usually whenever you do have a craftsman signing a work, it seems to be a little bit more subtle. It doesn't this seems to it sounds almost like these names are very easily and quickly seen when you go into the temple. It doesn't seem like it's a signature or a craftsman mark at the base of the pillar, so I don't know. I don't really go
Or
with
does
it.
it
I
say the
see
names are written on?
do
Does it
what?
say the names are written on them, or does it say the names are written on them, or
Yeah,
just that
they're
they're called
inscribed on
that?
it. Yeah. And
Okay.
so that's the
So
thing.
I did
They're
not do the reading on this section this week, so
we're gonna
um,
fire you. Oh no, I need you for the technical stuff. So
well, I mean, and I mean, of course, I also, being a person who is around a lot of fans, particularly of science fiction and various other things, I'm like, it doesn't seem that far fetched to me that even if it was a small inscription on the back of the pillar somewhere, that someone
that
who was
somebody noticed.
really wanting to prove how much they knew about the temples, be like, did you know that the artist signed the pillars at the very back on the bottom half third of the way around on the inside? The very edge of the lip, you'll see it.
The
You know,
third ridge
so I mean,
in from
yeah, that's
yeah,
the kind of like minutia that I could see someone getting into, um,
yeah,
and that's just me.
it's totally possible. I think there's more to it because there is a note made of it in scripture, so that kind of makes me think that there's got to be a little bit more there. I'm not saying I have a better theory. I have one that I'm
Well,
leaning
no,
towards,
I
but
mean, it could have been the writer being like, "Yes, everyone knows this, guys. We've all heard."
right. Well, and the other theory is that they were two famous or two very highly respected priests at that time. Um, uh, we're trying to find
The
evidence of those names. We
right,
haven't been
maybe
able to
the
do it.
priests who were in service, maybe the priests who were in service when the temple was dedicated, kind of thing.
Yeah, that's one theory. Yeah, maybe. Um, the other theory is that they're, just other leaders in Israel who were prominent. Another theory is they represent David and Solomon respectively in their roles within the temple. That Boaz means in strength, Jachin means he establishes. So David was identified as Boaz, who in strength gathered the materials for the temple, and Boaz actually, Jachin or Solomon actually established the temple because the wording for establish is actually mirrored in 2 Samuel 7, where God is talking about establishing David's son. So there is some possibility there. More symbolically, if we want to go with that route, there's the argument that represents the cosmic tree. Anybody with the flat earth theory, familiar with flat earth theory, should be familiar with the cosmic tree because that's what upholds the heavens from the earth and the roots go down to Sheol. Another reason why I don't ascribe to flat earth because no one's shown me the cosmic tree yet. Uh, so when we get there,
Well,
I might be
that's
converted.
because they're hiding it. The you
Yeah,
know,
this massive tree that
they
supports the heavens is hidden. Okay,
yeah, I
sure.
mean, the people, the secret powers that run everything are hiding it. That's, you know,
Right.
a
But
lot, somewhere near the edge of the earth. I mean, right?
yeah, sure. Whatever.
I'm
So, but
it's
that was
NASA. They're hiding it all. Anyway, but I'm
yeah.
of course
And the
being
moon landing
facetious.
was staged, and anyway. But before we go too far into
Before we
that,
get yeah, let's not
the
go too far into that.
yeah, so there's some thought that represents the cosmic tree, but in my mind, it's like, why do we have two if we are just representing one cosmic tree? Um, There's another theory that the mountains or that they represent mountains or that were the homes of the gods. Remember, the gods lived in the high places, and that's pretty well established both in Canaanite, Mesopotamian, Egyptian, all the ancient Near Eastern mythology. Of course, we have to go there. That they're phallic fertility symbols. That's the other symbolic possible representation, or it's
The
a single
trees?
sentence. Do what?
The trees?
The trees. I lost
You're
you.
saying the trees are you saying that that was the trees? What's the
The the
symbol?
the
What are we
pillars.
talking about?
We're still
Oh,
talking about the
pillars. I'm
pillars
sorry. I
reference.
zoned out for a second. Okay, I thought we were talking about the tree. I thought we moved on to trees.
No, well, we're still talking about the pillars might represent the trees, but then that they might represent the phallic fertility symbols. So, which was
Okay.
common in other ancient Near Eastern
Remember I made
temples. Do-
remember I made no promises about this week.
I
My
know.
brain went
Well,
somewhere else for a little minute.
I'm carrying this load and I'm trying to do it with grace. It's all on me. I get it. But there's a possibility the two words together form a single sentence, and that sentence would read, God establishes with strength, or in strength, God establishes. Um, and, most of these theories either allow for the inclusion of Canaanite deities to be acknowledged, or maybe even used within the temple. And I really can't see any workable reason why these theories should be accepted. Why are we trying so hard to say that God's temple, created and crafted by Solomon, under the provision of David, who was so devoted to God, who's received these blueprints, why in the world would we say that there's all of these other symbols from the Canaanite religion? Now, I say that, and let's add a little nuance here and some caveats. Temples looked like temples, okay? All temples kind of had a basic feel and structure and different elements about them that allowed them to be recognized as temples no matter which god they were built for. So there are going to be similarities. Specific symbolic representations to other gods was something that would not have been allowed. And so
Mhm.
don't I don't think a lot of these are workable theories. Now, the one theory that I think has a little bit of textual support is that the pillars have something to do with the kings of Judah. And I don't know exactly how to define it, but the reason why I say that is because in 2 Kings 11, 13, 14, it says, when Athaliah heard the noise of the guard of the people, she went to the house of the Lord to the people, and then she looked, and there was the king standing by the pillar according to the custom. So the king is standing by the pillar. Then in 2 Kings 23:3, it says, and the king stood by the pillar and made a covenant before the Lord to walk after the Lord, to keep his commandments and his testimonies and his statutes with all his heart and all his soul. So again, the king, according to the custom, he goes to the pillar. So these are things that evidently were used in the coronation of the new king, and whether that was the original intent, or it was something that grew out of the fact that they were there, we aren't told. But because there is a little bit of two other references, that makes me think that there is something to do with the kingship specifically, and not necessarily with anything else that has been thrown out there. Now, what I can say, and I feel fairly confident in saying this, that these are not fertility symbols, okay? They're just not. The fir
Okay.
I don't have a problem going out of that one. They're not male and female, okay? I saw those that one pillar was male and one pillar was female, and it okay, that doesn't even make sense. Um, then the pillars were supposed to represent a part of the male anatomy, and the porch was supposed to be the there's really no polite way to say this. Um, Anyway, let's just say the porch is not male genitalia and the pillars are not representative of any other thing that comes in pairs with men. How's that? So,
Okay, it
not
works.
there. I saw entire diagrams of this. It was disturbing. Someone with a disturbed mind came up with this theory. The temple, on the whole, is not laid out like a human body. They didn't have robots. Okay, it looks like some weird robotic thing. Um, and honestly, the only places I found on the internet that actually put forth these kinds of theories, and I do kind of rifle through some of these more questionable sites just to see what people are saying who are not of my same worldview. But the only ones who are putting out these kinds of ideas were the Freemasons, the Kabbalists, tarot card readers, and Wiccans. Okay, these are the people who were making these claims about the construction of the temple. So basically, sites that promote these kinds of ideologies, we really don't need to take seriously because what they're saying is there's some kind of hidden knowledge that only the enlightened, only the initiated can access. And we call that under the broader term Gnosticism. And we know that Gnosticism should be shunned. So we don't have to worry about trying to
Hmm.
figure out their secret code. It's not God's code.
Right.
It's just they use the label God, the Bible, Solomon's temple to get people who want to learn more about God interested. It's not because they're going to accurately represent what the Bible teaches. So I think we need to be
Yeah.
very aware of these. They're plots. I mean, that's what they are.
Yeah.
It's not.
Well, and yeah, and that kind of reminds me of there. I was talking to you about this the other day. There was somebody who actually spoke Hebrew
Mhm.
and read Hebrew. He, I don't know if it's man or woman, but they wound up. They're apparently in a lot of the Kabbalist uh,
Oh,
writings. There's references to Solomon's seal, which is a some kind of magical sigil that allows you uh, to to access certain powers. And there is this person made what they labeled as quote Solomon's seal, but it had all these Hebrew and Latin glyphs on it, which was really funny that it had Latin on it as well. Um, but the but around the edges, apparently, it was garlic bread and cheese or something. I can't remember exactly what it was, but it was something to that effect. And then the and then in the Latin, I think it said like tomato soup or something like that. And everyone who was into this whole idea of Solomon's seal just just kind of ate it up, and the whole thing went viral in these groups. And and the person was like, like just having a good time trolling the trolls and exposing their ignorance, the fact that they're supposed to be these experts on their own sect of religion, and they don't even know that this glyph says is something that's not even close to what Solomon's seal would be.
well, and that's what I found in so many of these. Sorry.
'Cause if you just let some of them talk long enough, they'll show you exactly what they don't know. Is that where you were going?
That's exactly where it's going. I mean, so often they really don't know Hebrew. They know like an aleph is a 1. They know that bet is 2. They don't really know how to do Hebrew, how to read Hebrew. They have a little superficial knowledge, and that superficial knowledge has given them confidence to make claims about the Hebrew that are completely you can't substantiate. They're not
Mhm,
supportable.
mhm.
And so
So
this
the
is the
Dunning
reason
Kruger
why
effect.
real scholars go, yeah, there's no truth in it. And so we've got to be careful where our sources are and check everyone. Check several credible sources. There's going to be lots of points of debate among scholars on nuance, on trivia. Not trivia is the wrong word, but the
Minutia.
minutia. Yes, there's going to be debate on that. There's going to be debate on exactly what it means. But the foundational, the main themes, the big ideas they're going to agree on these things. And there's not going to be a debate on that. So what we need to do is to double check and make sure that what we're looking at has support from multiple sources, multiple credible, well researched, and respected sources, because there is wisdom in an abundance of counselors. And that's the thing. Yeah, like I said, there's going to be some debate on different ideas, but when it comes to what the actual text says, a lot of times there isn't a debate, there's agreement. And the disagreement comes in how do we apply and how do we interpret, not what the actual information is. And so that's the reason why I can listen to a lot of teachers that I don't necessarily agree with their interpretation or their application, but I can count on them to present the data correctly and faithfully.
Hmm.
That's what you wanna work with. That's who you wanna look for. So, um, other notable characteristics of these pillars, they have pomegranates and lilies. Now, pomegranates are considered to be a blessing to the people in Israel. In Deuteronomy 8:8, it says, "The land of wheat and barley, of vines and fig trees and pomegranates, a land of olive trees and honey." This is describing the promised land. Pomegranates are one of the fruits that they were going to anticipate being able to harvest and grow with ease. Tradition claims that pomegranates have 613 seeds, just like there's 613 laws of the Torah. I love the symbolism of this.
Hmm.
By the way, if you ever count, which I haven't, but other people have, there's not 613 seeds in most pomegranates. There might be a few out there, but most of them, not so much. But the symbolism is that God's law, it's sweet, but it's also messy. And sometimes it can be a little tart. And sometimes, so it's got all of this kind of wrapped up together. It's not
Hmm.
just it's not like a strawberry that's always sweet, or always just
Right.
easy to eat. And you have to work to get at those seeds. Those aren't something you're just gonna pick and bite. So, which kind of always made me think that maybe the pomegranate is, the fruit in, Eden, not so much an apple. An apple just seems too easy to me. I like the idea of them actually having to work, like it's there was some effort put forward. So
Yeah.
that's speculation, and we can for sure say it wasn't, what's the apple everybody likes, the Washington Reds or
The red
yeah,
delicious or the oh what no there's not that one. There's whatever those are. Those icky, mealy, mushy
yeah,
ones.
I don't know see, that wouldn't tempt anyone. Now if it had been a Granny Smith, but those didn't come along until out later. So anyway, but the pomegranates, actually have their own special blessing. In Judaism, before you eat a pomegranate, if you're Jewish, you would say, "May it be your will, Lord our God and God of our forefathers, that our merits increase like the seeds of the pomegranate." They're the symbol of a new year, of Rosh Hashanah. You would eat pomegranates on that holiday. Pomegranates are found in Song of Solomon, and they were a fruit that was linked to sensuality, of beauty, of love, and fertility. I mean, because there's something you don't eat very easily. It's you have to get your fingers messy, so there's the tactile, all your senses are involved in eating a pomegranate, plus there's the multiplicity of seeds, so it works very well as a symbol for all of these things. Even today, a lot of the Torah scrolls are decorated with pomegranates, so they still have high standing. Pomegranates have significance in lots of religions. They really have a place of honor. In Greece, they were known as the fruit of the dead, and they were believed to be created from the blood of the dying Adonis. Persephone was doomed to spend 3 months in Hades because she ate three pomegranate seeds. Um,
Mhm.
in Zoroastrianism, this fruit was used in rituals and they adorned their spears with gold pomegranates. And in Buddhism, even today, it's considered one of three blessed foods. In Islam, it is included in descriptions of paradise. The Egyptians saw it as a symbol of prosperity, and ancient pomegranate seeds were found in tombs and graves. So they were very, very much a part of culture from the very beginning. And there was even an ivory pomegranate found in the palace of Nimrod at the Assyrian king. So, and also Canaanite graves, there's clay pomegranates that were found in the graves. So the pomegranate itself is a highly charged symbol in a lot of cultures from the beginning of time through today. And one of the reasons why is because in most cultures, the pomegranate is a symbol of female genitalia. So, of course, critics and scholars who want to discredit the Bible and want to downplay monotheism within Judaism will tell you this is absolute proof that once again, the temple was a fertility temple. Uh, I don't buy it. I just don't buy it. Um, the problem with this being fertility symbols is fertility gods were worshipped with ritual acts of sex that happened usually in or around the temple. There's no record of that in Judaism. When practiced correctly, this does not happen. This is not part of the sanctioned worship of Yahweh in the temple. So,
Mhm.
the practices don't line up with the symbolism or the meaning they're trying to attach to these symbols. And that's the thing about symbols. They have more than one meaning. It's not limited to one thing. So, the other symbol that we talked about, are going to talk about, is lilies, and those are Shoshan or Shoshanim, and they are probably connected with the word shesh, which is six in Hebrew, and that's a six-petaled flower. So
Mhm.
the idea of it being a lily is based on the number of petals. There's some debate about which lily. There's some really beautiful lilies, a diversity of lilies that grow in the area that are native to the land of Israel. One of the most famous is the Madonna lily, and they are those are the huge white lilies that we see in a lot of Christian churches around Easter time because they represent rebirth, resurrection, the new beginnings, and they have been a part of the symbolism from in Judaism and in Christianity for a very long time. The they're also valued for their fragrance, and they would be steeped with myrrh, and these were used in anointing the oil, in the anointing oils for the priest, and so they were symbols of purity. And lilies are only mentioned 15 times in the Bible. 4 times they're described in the ornamentation of the temple, either here in Kings or in Chronicles. 2 times in just the superscriptions of the Psalms. That's Psalm
Mhm.
45 and 69, and they appear to be names of the tune to which that psalm is sung to. And so they weren't necessarily spoken about in the psalm, just to the tune one of the translations anyway, is to the tune of the lilies. So the idea being
Hmm.
that lilies was the name of the musical arrangement. 8 times it's,
Mhm.
mentioned in Song of Songs to describe either each other or their activities, and then 1 time in Hosea 14:5, and it reads, "I will be like the dew to Israel, he shall blossom like the lily, he shall take root like the trees of Lebanon." Couldn't read my own writing. So, only one of these verses really helps us understand what the symbolism of the lily would be according to biblical text, what the Bible has to say about lilies, and that would be Hosea. And I the, Hosea one has the lily standing in as a symbol for someone who is blessed by God. And Arbanel, he cites a tradition that says that rain would drown a lily, but it would blossom if watered by the dew, and its heart is always turned upwards towards the heavens. So if we remember that all of the imagery of the temple is about recalling Eden to mind, it's about trying to make us think about the creation and that time when humanity actually walked with God, when we could have conversations with God. That's what the temple is primarily supposed to do. We can go back to Genesis 2:6, and it says, "And a mist was going up from the land and the watering the whole face of the ground." Rain in Genesis is the demonstration of judgment for sin. Very seldom in Genesis. Now, in other places, when we get into Samuel, we get into Judges, rain becomes a sign of God's blessing. In Genesis, not so much, because we have the flood, we have fire and brimstone rained down on Sodom and Gomorrah. The idea of rain being not so much a blessing, but more of a demonstration of wrath is what we find in Genesis. And dew throughout the Torah is always presented as evidence of God's blessing. And Isaac, no, sorry, Isaac blesses Jacob. This Genesis 27:28 says, "May the Lord give you the dew of heaven." Conversely, his blessing to Esau in Genesis 27:39 says he will dwell away from the dew of heaven. In Exodus 16, the manna comes with the dew, also in Numbers 11. In Deuteronomy 32, Moses asked that his words drop like rain, speech distilled as dew. Deuteronomy 33:13, Moses blesses Joseph with the choicest gifts of heaven in the ESV, but most translations rely on, there's two Hebrew manuscripts and a Targum that says the precious things of heaven for the dew. Deuteronomy 33:28, Moses blesses Asher to live in the land whose heaven drops down dew. And so, this idea that dew is a blessing, dew is a way of providing moisture for the plants without fear of drowning them, without fear of damage. And in the temple, if it's supposed to be a reclamation or a recreation of Eden, then the lily is the perfect symbol for God's provision and his gentle love towards his people. So, because that's not something as an artist that you can depict. Depicting the dew isn't easy. However, depicting something that was believed to be benefited by the dew, specifically reliant on the dew, that would be a much easier task. And it would have been understood by the people of that day because the idea of dew being a gentle source of water for this particular plant probably would have been a common knowledge. But probably most notably is Isaiah 26:19. Your dead shall live, their body shall rise. You who dwell in dust, awake and sing for joy, for your dew is the dew of light, and the earth will give birth to the dead. So again, this idea of resurrection and rebirth being not just wrapped up in the idea of dew, but also the plant that benefits from the dew. And we see that in Easter. We see this in our Christian churches today when you can walk into a sanctuary and the podium and the stage and all around it is surrounded by these Madonna lilies. And
Hmm.
so I think this is probably the purpose of that particular symbol. So verse 23, we're back still verse 1 Kings chapter 7 says, "Then he made a sea of cast metal. It was round 10 cubits from the brim to brim, 5 cubits high, and the line of 30 cubits measured its circumference." This is huge. Now, if you're like me, just reading numbers does not does not help you one little bit. I have a hard time envisioning that. So, we will, evidently I wasn't there yet. The size of this is what impressed me, so I keep wanting to just skip some of the stuff. So we're just gonna start with my notes and kinda stay on track. First, we should note that the tabernacle itself before the temple actually had a holding tank of water. It was used for the priest, um, for washing. That's in Exodus 30:18. Second Chronicles 4:6 says that this sea is also used by the priest for washing. So there's a very utilitarian function of this bronze sea. Now, this is not like a mikvah. This is not used for ritual immersion. Okay, in order for this to have been used for that, it would have to have living water in it. It would not need to, it couldn't be water that was stagnant or had been setting. And of course, the rabbis have a very creative solution for this because the sea is supposed to set on the back of 12 bulls. They said that there were pipes that ran down through the bulls' bodies, through their feet, into springs underneath where the temple set. And so the sea was replenished with these fresh waters. Therefore, it would have been living waters, and it could be used for ritual immersion. Um, Probably not the case. But it is an interesting theory to think that, this would have happened. Uh, what we do know about it is that we're told it is cast, okay? So that's important. It's not hammered, it's not beaten, it's not shaped or carved, it is poured. In order
Mhm.
for this to be poured, it had to be one continuous pour. It could not be layer upon layer because that leaves cracks, that leaves seams. That's
Mhm.
it's just it would not work. So building this thing would have required an army because the measurements from brim to brim, 15 feet minimum, 7 foot tall minimum, 44 feet in circumference. Now, in Kings, it says it holds 2,000 baths. We have no idea what that is. In Chronicles, it's 3,000. So basically, between 11,500 gallons to 17,000 gallons of water. That's a lot. So, in order to give a picture that we might be able to wrap our heads around, a 4 foot tall pool, 12 foot in diameter, holds 3,398 gallons. In order to get closer, we'd have to up the size of that pool to a 24-foot round pool that holds 11,895 gallons of water. A 30-foot pool, circumference pool, holds 18,585 gallons. So somewhere between, I'm sorry, not circumference, that'd be diameter. So somewhere between a 24-foot pool and a 30-foot pool is how much water this thing held.
Hmm.
I mean, so it was massive. Plus, we also know that it's 4 fingers thick. Another one whose walls are 4 fingers thick. This thing weighed a ton. So when you think about the process of creating this, first of all, you're going to have an army to create the mold that it's being cast in. That right there is mind-boggling that they would have been able to create a mold for this that would actually allow them to make a bowl. Um, you would have to have enough fire, animal chips, whatever, to keep enough wood for fires to melt the bronze.
Mhm.
Good grief, that would have taken again, that the army, that would have been a massive undertaking because all of this bronze would have had to have been melted pretty close to the same time, and it would have had to be a continuous melting process, keeping everything at the right temperature because you do have to get it to the right temperature before you can pour it, and as one, crucible would have been emptied into into the mold, the next one would have had to have been right behind it, ready to pour, and it would have had to have been just on one after another, and then, you would have had pouring happening at multiple sites around it. You wouldn't have had just one person pouring into one spot. It would have been
Mhm.
happening simultaneously, building up from the bottom. Um, or maybe even they could have even done it inverted where they dug out into the sands where the top was at the bottom and then they filled in that way, but it would have had to have been done with precision and it would have had to have perfect timing. And if there wasn't, there would have been seams. And with that much water, which would have weighed around 5 tons minimum, it would have just popped it. It would have broken without any problem at all, and so when you think of the temperatures required, bronze melts around 1,675 degrees Fahrenheit. Um, these are massive temperatures. Uh, there was, if I'm like, I can envision this because I've done this work, and I can think about how hard it would have been. And it even gets more complicated because on the rim, it was lined with gourds that were cast with it. And so that's in verse 24. And so anytime you add objects to that pour with depth and dimension and kind of a three-dimensional quality, what you wind up with are places for pockets of air, which totally ruins your design. And the other thing you end up is places for water to collect. That could possibly
Mhm.
explode. It's very dangerous. And so it's not something that was easily done. Adding just something that allowed for pockets, you had to have ways for air to escape. They're called sprues. Um, just quite simply, without supernatural intervention, which is totally possible. I mean, after all, we're building a temple. Someone died building this. More than
Mhm.
someone died building this. Just if we were talking natural means, there's just no way around it. It was
Right.
It was too dangerous. It was a massively dangerous, and difficult, project. This was not just a bronze bowl setting in the temple, and I think because I have done this kind of work, it's something that I can wrap my mind around, and I can just go, "Why are we not talking about what an amazing feat this was?"
Right.
This was amazing. There are people I know who, if you say something about the Bronze Sea, they have no idea that was even part of the temple. A
Right.
and, why? I mean, it's fascinating. Now, what's really fascinating about it is there's a sea in Yahweh's temple, and Yam is the Hebrew word for sea, and if you know any of the names of the Canaanite gods, you're gonna know that Yam is also the name for sea, so the sea god. So,
Mhm.
this is where I went down this crazy rabbit hole. Um, okay, so first of all, almost every ancient religion has a god of the sea. Seas are terrifying. They're necessary. They're sources of provision. They are awe-inspiring. The sea is everything that it can provoke any and every emotion humanity would ever have. I mean,
Mhm.
you go out on the waters in a dark storm, the terror, you're floating on it on a sunny day with a nice breeze, the calmness and the peace of that. But every religion, and I'm not talking like every ancient Near Eastern religion. I'm talking Mesoamerica religion. I'm talking Hinduism. I'm talking about Australian Aboriginal religion. Every religion has a god of the sea. And so the seas, because they are shapeless, are often represented by, a shapeless serpentine figure, again, some kind of either leviathan if you're, in ancient Near Eastern world, or, some kind of dragon if you're in, European or Chinese, kind of religions. So there's different representations, but they all have kind of a similar quality of this thing that can twist and turn and take on different shapes as it desires. Now, in early Mesopotamian myth, the sea was represented by a female goddess, Namu, who was personified. She personified the primordial waters. She's also the mother who gave birth to heaven and earth, who bore all the gods. Now, in Namu's mythology, there is no distinction between freshwater and seawater. They're all just kind of mixed. And then later, as the mythologies grew, there did get to be a differentiation between fresh and seawater. The most famous being Tiamat, who was the goddess, and she was a saltwater. And then there was Apsu, who was freshwater. Now, Tiamat, the goddess of the salt waters, had to be overthrown and desecrated in order for the earth to be built. Apsu was the god of the fresh waters. So the intermingling of the two were believed to be what produced the first god. And the first gods were not so much born as they sprang into being. And Apsu, their father, wasn't a big fan of theirs. He actually wished to kill them off. And so he's killed and buried beneath the earth. Tiamat, during all of this, she objected to the idea that her children would be killed. And so one of her sons, Ea, overheard Apsu that he was wanting to kill his kids, and he managed to kill his dad instead. Which, killing the father figure is a very common trope in these mythologies. And Ea actually builds his home on Apsu's corpse, and Ea gives birth to Marduk, who later killed Tiamat, but not before Tiamat gives birth to monsters um, who attack Marduk. So Marduk actually uses Tiamat's. I'm going somewhere with this, I promise. Marduk uses
Okay.
Tiamat's corpse to create the heavens and the earth. So half of her body becomes the sky, the other half becomes the clouds, the mist, and the bodies of water found on the earth. Her eyes become the Tigris and Euphrates. So her body is defiled in order for humanity to live. Ea is also known as Enki of Eridu in the Sumerian mythologies. And his home in the Sumerian mythologies was the Abyss or Apsu, where he built his home also. E.P. Van Buren says later temples were founded in conformity with ordinances or rituals of Eridu. In other words, over the source of fresh water. Now, the water features within temples started becoming such a regular feature and were all said to be drawn from the body of Apsu. It didn't matter which god that the temple was built to, this water source was believed to be Apsu. So his name actually became the architectural byword for a water source within the temple. So you could look up Apsus in the temple, and it would refer not necessarily to the god, but to the water source. Um, Water from Apsu was used in purification rites, and they were believed to have healing properties, and they were also used in exorcism. The Dictionary of Deities and Demons says the conception of the primeval sea is essential to temple symbolism. So this is how central the idea of having a water source in the temple is. It also cites the Temple of Gudea as an example, and it says the temple Huh, I can't. Is the link between heaven and earth, has its roots in the primeval sea, and thus compromises the whole of the universe. The earth is not only based upon, but surrounded by the sea. So, in order to avoid a super long lecture about comparative religion, I'll leave that kind of where.
Too late.
Oh, well, there's more because I actually had to pick up some more. But anyway, Tiamat and Marduk are the Babylonian version of the Mesopotamian story of Baal and Yam. And so, there's some differences, but the themes are the same. And, the problem with ancient mythologies, anytime you have even the same story written from, one place to another place, there's differences. They're not uniform. There's always some kind of subtle distinction between one version written in this city and that version written in that city. And so that leaves scholars debating which was the first, which came first, the chicken or the egg, who changed what. That's the really cool thing about scripture. We don't have that issue, at least not in the same, uh, not to the same extent that we have with ancient stories. But the main theme is that chaos had to be defeated in order for humanity to exist. And chaos was embodied in this sea god or goddess, whether we're talking Apsu, Tiamat, or Yam. They're all part of the same system where water is necessary but terrifying. And so in these ancient mythologies, it's necessary because, obviously we need water to live, but terrifying because at any moment in time it can turn on us and it can kill us. And so part of the god, the head god who had defeated this chaos, his job was to hold the chaos at bay in order to protect humanity. And so there are some distinctions between the Tiamat and Apsu story and Baal and Yam story. And I fell into a huge rabbit hole about what the distinctions were and why they mattered. And at first I wasn't going to go into them, and but I'm going to have to. So I couldn't help myself. But anyway, the get my mind in order. Lauren R. Fisher, he in his paper, The Creation at Ugarit, and in the Old Testament, he contrasts Baal and Marduk, noting that Baal's victory in opposition to Marduk's does not result in creation, at least not as we would traditionally define it. Baal's victory over Yam actually just gets him a house. It gets him a palace, and this is one of the major themes of the Baal cycle. And he builds this temple or palace, which it's in the story, it's one and the same. His home and his palace are together. They're the same building, and I think that's something we need to remember. But, he does it by defeating Yam, and this palace becomes a microcosm that represents the entire world. And so Fisher argues that despite the apparent lack of creation in the Baal cycles, that, the creation is represented in the building of the temple. Well, and we kind of see a similar theme within the Bible where the creation of the world is kind of distilled down into something smaller with the creation of the first temple, which is Eden. And then we go into this new temple where we have the same symbolism of Eden replayed. So there is a kind of a continuity of thought that we would expect from similar cultures from a similar time happening here, where symbols are repurposed. Um, but with the House of Baal, we don't just have a house; we have the pattern for all of creation, which is being formed because it defines the purpose or the function of each element that goes into the building of the house. So if water is within the house is used for drinking and purifying and healing, then water in the world at large is going to be used for purifying, drinking, and healing. And if you're familiar with John Walton's work, you know that John Walton sees ancient creation as a matter of functionality versus formation. And so he would seem to support Fisher's argument. Now, much of Baal's story is focused on his defeat of Yam and then the building of his house. But it's interesting that when you look at the Baal story, Baal always stands in as a representative for El. El is the creator god as far as he is known as the creator of creatures. He's known as the father of years, father time, the father of mankind. So Baal doesn't create humanity, his father El does. And Baal is actually relegated to his common title, which is Prince, Lord of the Earth. And El is recognized as the god who installed him, the one who instituted his kingship. So, what's really crazy about the story, though, despite this, El is not a fan of Baal. El actually is in competition with Baal on some levels. There's this animosity. Baal El actually supports Yam, Chaos, to be the winner at first, and actually tells Yam, "Hey, if you want to rule the earth, you've got to defeat Baal. You can't get there unless you defeat him." But then when it comes down to it, El flops and he switches his mind and decides that Baal needs to be the one in charge. And so there's this really weird dynamic that's happening within the story where there's no unity within the Baal and El figures who are trying to rule the earth, but at the same time they're totally dependent on each other. And Baal only rules under the permission and mentorship or sponsorship of El. And so the story of Baal and Yam is basically showing how Baal, despite El's desires and despite El's uh, affinity for Yam, Baal is the one who keeps Yam at bay. Baal is the one who stops Yam from destroying humanity. And
Hmm.
so Baal is completely terrified that Yam is going to return. And one of the distinctions of his house, he won't even put windows in his house lest Yam rises up and floods him out. So there's no water within Baal's house, and there's no way for water to access this. And I thought this was an interesting point because when you go back to what we looked at a few weeks ago, the windows of the temple for God are described at length. And
Mhm.
so we have uh, this very sharp distinction. And the Baal's defeat of Yam is what allows him to have divine rest. This is pulling on Walton's notes here. And Walton notes that A&E, in the A&E cultures, divine rest is wholly dependent on winning this divine conflict against chaos. And even after Baal won, he still lives in fear of Yam. And
Mhm.
so in Genesis, though, what we see is the complete opposite. God is not in conflict with Yam. He's not in conflict with the sea. In fact, the picture we have is quite the opposite. He broods over the water. And the word picture with that's supposed to go with that is found in Deuteronomy 32:11. It says, like an eagle that stirs up its nest and flutters, and that's the ESV. Brooding's a better one, but flutters over its young, spreading out its wings and catching them, bearing them on the pinions. It's this idea of care that a mother bird provides to her eggs and her hatchlings. It's not
Mhm.
adversarial. It's not having to overthrow. And I'm not saying that there's no imagery in the Bible where God, you know, defeats chaos. We have that, and we're going to talk about where we find that. But in Genesis, that what the temple is supposed to be pointing us back to, what the temple is looking at for its primary source of inspiration, there's no conflict. It's always about care. It's about bringing out the best and shaping these elements, and particularly the primordial waters, to God's service. And there's no resistance. There's no defiance on the part of the water. The water does what it's commanded to do, which is to separate and to make room for the earth so that humanity can live. And so I think we're going to stop right there because I want to pick up where um, the Bible does talk about the conflict.
Yeah.
And then
Well,
after we kind of look at some more things about the sea as conflict and chaos, and why that's important, and how the this Bronze Sea is actually this massive statement that served a lot of purposes within the temple, because it says so many things, to really depending on who is looking at it, who's coming to see it, and
mhm,
that which is what good art does. Good art lets everybody come with
right.
their own baggage and understand it in a way that's unique to them. So
Mhm.
we're going to talk
Well,
some more about that, but
one thing that y- yeah, well, one thing that I want to bring up that, and this is just I just want to kind of touch on this and tag it on. It's probably part of where you're going, but you're talking about the father son conflict that goes on. And we've mentioned this, I think, before, but I think it's always worth mentioning that that's one of the things that really does set apart our faith from a lot of the other ancients is that there is the tendency of the son to overthrow the
mhm,
father in those ancient religions, whereas in Christianity, the son is submissive to the
right.
father, and they're also
Mhm,
one. But that's a whole nother when we get into. But it's counter to the narrative that you get with the other religions. And one of the things that I was really thinking about with that as you were talking about, I know it looked like I was just zoning out, but I was uh, listening to to
I wondered if you
to
were
a good
asleep a
deal
couple
of it.
times.
Um, yeah, like I said, I'm a little off this week, but no, one of the things I was thinking was that Lewis kind of talks about not necessarily the ancient religion aspect of it, but he talks about this. I don't know if he uses the phrase, but it's like this generational narcissism um, is kind of fed into that idea as well that we know better than our parents.
Mhm,
Well, in Judaism, it's honor your mother and your
mhm,
father. And so it kind of bleeds into every aspect of it. That it's not necessarily, um, every generation thinks that they've got the next best thing, and it's not necessarily a one to one. But if you have a God whose identity is wrapped up in defeating his father, then what's your action going to be as a child?
right.
Uh, so and then not to not to appear anti-science because I'm not at all. I personally think science is just understanding the way God built the
Mhm,
world. But instead of honoring God in our discoveries, too many people want to take it to, oh well, look how much smarter we are than these ancient people.
yeah.
And it's again, I'm not anti-science. I'm absolutely pro science, but
Well,
I think that people take it too far when they go, "Oh, well, see, this is what you once thought was just some kind of miraculous way of the universe working," and the harping on the God of the gaps theory. But whenever we do engage in these things, whatever we're doing, we should do it to honor the Lord and go, oh, it's really interesting how he put the universe together so that it would work this way, and so that we could discover these things, and so that we could take dominion over
Mhm.
the world.
I think sometimes we
So
forget that
anyway,
ancient people were busy coming up with technologies like, houses, things that allowed you to
right,
survive
right.
more comfortably so you could think about other things, plumbing.
Yeah, well, it's yeah, and I'm not 100% sold on Maslow's hierarchy of needs, but there is something to be said about
When your belly's
having
full.
your basic needs, yeah, having your basic needs met. I actually, when I was listening to an episode of Revisionist History recently, where they were talking about the guy who made the K rations.
Okay.
I can't remember his name, but the doctor who came up with those, they did a study during World War II that was a starvation study, and the participants basically just went without food for months and months on end. Yeah, they had like these tiny rations of food they could eat every day, and yeah, it's a very disturbing episode. But they were talking about how when you're in that situation and
Mhm.
you're being denied food, that the way you think about the world changes, and you stop. It mentally it drains you, and the only thing you can think about is food. And he said people talk about going to a large meal and saying, "Oh, I'm starving." He's like, "No, no, your body does not think about a large feast when you're starving. It thinks about something else."
Mhm.
And it gets very dark very quickly. So I recommend go check that out if you want to peer into kind of the minds of how some ancient cultures existed, because food was not always readily available.
Yeah,
So it kind of gets you a little glimpse into that.
well, and that's where we really do build on the shoulders of the people who came before, and
Hmm,
so,
hmm.
the person who figured out what a spoon was, I mean, it seems like such a simple thing because we all have them in a drawer in our kitchen somewhere, you know? But
Yep.
that was a major improvement over what things were before that. So, we need to
Yeah.
recognize
And
it took time and it took effort for some of these basic things to get instituted to the point that we as human beings no longer even consider them. We
yeah, yeah. I mean, when you think about, because you're talking about the bronze casting and stuff, and you think about, like, the wooden spoon that was carved out with a rock,
Mhm.
and then and then the other rock that allowed you to carve the other rock thing, and then you found the piece of metal that you figured out could
Melt,
melt
right?
and be molded. I want to know what was going on with that guy. Uh,
Well, yeah, I mean, and that's the thing, is like, and who figured out that the guts of animals could be, tuned when they're dried and stretched? I mean, that's
Yeah, yeah, music is, yeah, another thing. And then back to the spoon, you know, being able to take two pieces of rock and make an arrow or spearhead, and take down a bison, and then you find out that you can shape and carve its horns,
Mhm.
and make a horn spoon, which is going to be more durable and more water resistant than your wooden
Right.
spoon. I mean, it really, I mean, it is. It builds one thing on the next. That's, I remember going to the Natural History Museum here in Norman, and the
That's a cool
the
museum.
ways that the yeah, the ways that they use the different parts of the bison, like they're using the bladder as water
Mhm.
storage, just things that we wouldn't think of doing, but
Right.
they certainly did.
And yet
So
we act like this is we get so smug and we think, "Oh, well, of course they did that." Yeah,
hmm, hmm,
no, no, really think about it. Why did they do that? How did they get there? Those are really major discoveries whenever you're living off of the earth. And
yeah,
so
and that you can scrape the stuff off the inside of the hide and boil it down and make really good glue out of it.
right.
Yeah, the process is amazing.
It really is, and
So
and that's the reason why I think it's really cool to study these to remind ourselves that we're not as advanced as we'd like to think we are. We benefit from the advancements of other people who came before us, and so
mhm,
we can
mhm.
take no credit for the fact that we have central heat and air or electric lights. I mean,
Right,
that's
right.
just, and it's ridiculous for us to sit here and think that we can. So unless, you are actively involved in inventing and manufacturing these things, just cool your jets.
Yeah. Well, that being said, seems like a great place to end. I was trying to be on the positive and wonder side, and you're all getting grumpy with it. So I guess
Sleep deprivation, okay? I do good to be
ev-
positive and cheerful on a good day.
I understand that. But yeah. Well, everyone, thanks for joining us, and we will see you next time. And thanks for being patient with the us taking a little time here and there to deal with family stuff. It's just getting to be a little bit crazy lately,
Yeah.
and we look forward to seeing everyone, or I guess everyone, joining us next week. If you have questions in the meantime, ravencreeksc.com is the website. Raven Creek SC is the social media handle. Get in contact with us, and we'll love to have people be part of the conversation. So, anyway, we'll see you next time.
Bye.
Thanks. Bye.
You've been listening to the Faith and Other Oddities podcast, a Raven Creek Social Club production. Don't forget to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. If you like what you've heard, please write us a review on iTunes or consider supporting us on patreon.com/RavenCreekSC. As always, thank you for listening, and don't forget to join us next week.